Before he ever threw a pass in college, scouts were already comparing Trevor Lawrence to John Elway and Andrew Luck. At 17 years old, it was full-blown. This kid might be the best quarterback prospect we've ever graded.
So for the next 5 years, I think Trevor Lawrence is the best quarterback prospect since Andrew Luck, and I think maybe even a little better than Luck in terms of his ability to move.
The thing is, Trevor just wrapped up the best statistical season of his career, but almost nobody noticed. We're going through the whole story today to figure out why. We'll look at everything from Cartersville to Clemson, the disaster of a rookie year, the Doug Pederson roller coaster, and the Liam Coen turnaround that actually made him more underrated than more hyped. Cartersville, Georgia isn't exactly a football factory that's spitting out 5-star athletes every single year, but that changed when Trevor Lawrence showed up and won 41 straight games from his sophomore to his senior season. He walked away with 2 state titles and 4 region titles, but the real story was the record book. He broke Deshaun Watson's Georgia State records for passing yards and touchdowns, which is a massive deal because Watson was already a national champion and an NFL starter by then. When 247 Sports put together the composite rankings, Trevor didn't just finish near the top of the list. He was the #1 overall recruit in the entire country and was regarded as one of the best quarterback prospects the recruiting era has ever tracked. The hype only got more ridiculous once NFL scouts started chiming in. Mel Kiper Jr. ranked Lawrence as the 4th highest graded quarterback he had ever evaluated for a draft. He put Trevor only behind Elway, Peyton Manning, and Andrew Luck, which meant he was being compared to 2 Hall of Fame names and an All-Pro, before he had ever played a single college down. He arrived at Clemson and was in a QB competition with Kelly Bryant that only lasted 4 games. Dabo Swinney saw enough and actually made Trevor the starter as a freshman, and he went 11-0 for the rest of the year. He capped off that run in the national championship game against Alabama, a team everyone assumed would roll through anyone in their path. Clemson didn't just beat the defending champs, they blew them out 44-16, and Trevor threw his 3rd touchdown of the night as the game turned into a total rout. He became the first true freshman quarterback to start and win a national championship game since Jamel Holloway did it for Oklahoma back in 1985. There were 34 years between true freshmen pulling that off, and Lawrence did it after being on campus for only 1 semester. The next 2 seasons were more of the same dominance, just in a different shape. He made back-to-back college football playoff appearances and finished his 3 seasons with 90 career total touchdowns against only 17 interceptions.
Lawrence slipping as he sets up and now delivers the end zone, and it's caught by Justin Ross.
That ratio almost doesn't even make sense for a college QB playing that many snaps against elite competition. His overall record as a starter at Clemson was 34-2, and both of those losses came in playoff games against teams with historic defenses. By his junior year, something strange started happening in the NFL. Teams that were struggling started tanking on purpose, and they weren't being quiet about it either. Tank for Trevor became an actual slogan where fans of bad franchises openly rooted for their own team to lose in 2020.
Because here we are 3 months later, and the hashtag Tank for Trevor is positioning itself for a 2-year run as a Twitter trend.
Landing the #1 pick meant landing a generational prospect, and teams don't usually get fan bases to cheer for losses like that. The certainty around this prospect was just different from anything the league had seen in years. This was about as close to a guaranteed outcome as the NFL draft has ever produced. He wasn't just a project or fit-dependent prospect, but a sure thing according to essentially everyone who studied the position for a living. Then Jacksonville actually made the pick at #1 overall, and almost immediately everything that could go wrong did. Jags had gone 1-15 the year before, and there was no doubt about it. This was the worst team in the league. When you're that bad, the draft handles the quarterback position essentially for you. The Jags took Lawrence first overall in 2021, and to run the show, they hired Urban Meyer. This was a guy with 3 national titles at the college level, but 0 NFL coaching experience. On paper, it looked like a bold move, but in reality, it turned into one of the worst coaching tenures the league has ever seen. We're not going to spend 10 minutes on this, but you need the highlights because they explain everything that follows. Meyer skipped a flight home after a Thursday night loss to hang out at a bar in Ohio, and video surfaced of him with a woman who was not his wife while his team was only 3 weeks into the season. He reportedly kicked his own kicker, Josh Lambo, during a padded practice. He even called his own assistant coaches losers in a staff meeting and made them justify their resumes out loud. There are also like 20 other things, but eventually he was fired 13 games into his only season, leaving the building with a 2-11 record to show for it. Now put a rookie QB in the middle of that mess. This was the most hyped prospect in a generation, and he was thrown into a building with no structure and a head coach who didn't even seem to know the good players in the league, including Aaron Donald. Lawrence's rookie numbers reflect the chaos. He led the entire NFL in interceptions with 17, threw just 12 touchdown passes, and completed under 60% of his throws. His passer rating sat at 71.9 for the season as the Jags finished 3-14. Scores is the kind of stat line that sticks with the guy for the whole season. Trevor had lost as many games that rookie season as he did in high school and college combined. He had 4 losses total across roughly 8 years of competitive football before the NFL, and then he hit 14 losses in a single year as a professional. The NFL has a way of humbling people, but rarely does it happen that fast to someone that decorated. Now, it's easy to look at those numbers and start writing the bust narrative right then and there. That's not really fair, and the tape shows it's not accurate either. This wasn't a talent problem. It was a demolition derby of a locker room, a first-time NFL head coach making rookie mistakes of his own, and a young quarterback getting thrown into the fire with basically zero support system. You can't judge this guy off of that. You judge the environment. What Jacksonville actually needed was somebody who knew how to run an NFL operation. They needed structure more than they needed another skill player or another draft pick, and for a little while, that's exactly what they went out and got. Doug Pederson had won a Super Bowl in Philadelphia just a few years earlier, and that matters a lot more than you might think. What Doug brought into the building was actually something the Jags hadn't seen in years, if not decades, which was real structure and a real game plan. Coaching finally treated the quarterback room like a functioning NFL operation instead of a college locker room with pro paychecks. Almost right away, you could see the difference in how Lawrence carried himself on the field. The 2022 season is where it showed up on the stat sheet. Trevor threw for 4,113 yards and 25 touchdowns with just 8 interceptions, a number that looks almost impossible next to the 17 he had as a rookie. He made his first Pro Bowl, and the Jags won the AFC South to make the playoffs for the first time since 2017. Whatever question marks you had after year 1, year 2 was answering them fast. Then came the wildcard game against the Chargers. For about 2.5 quarters, it looked like everything people had feared about Trevor was true. They were down 27-0, and he had 4 interceptions before halftime. Announcers were openly comparing it to some of the worst playoff performances ever charted for a starting QB. If you had turned on the game at the break, you would have walked away thinking the Jags had made a horrible mistake building around this guy. But here's where it actually gets interesting. Trevor came out of the locker room and threw for 288 yards with 4 touchdowns in the second half alone.
Lawrence protected well. Going deep, has a man open again. Zay Jones for the touchdown.
The Jags completed the 3rd largest comeback in NFL playoff history and won 31-30. Having 4 picks and 4 touchdowns in the same game, split almost perfectly down the middle by halftime, is definitely not a normal stat line. That was 2 different quarterbacks showing up in the same jersey. For a lot of people watching, that felt like the game he actually arrived. Multiple years of waiting felt justified in just one night. The kid who was supposed to be the next great one had finally shown it, even if he had to dig himself out of a massive hole to prove it. Then 2023 happened. The Jags started 8-3 and MVP buzz was building around Trevor Lawrence for real. This was not just draft class hype anymore, it was an actual weekly conversation about him being one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Then it all came apart. Jacksonville lost 5 of their final 6 games and missed the playoffs entirely. An 8-3 team that couldn't even close is the kind of collapse that makes people start asking questions they had stopped asking the year before. And 2024 was even worse. Lawrence signed a $275 million contract extension heading into the season, which tied him with Joe Burrow as the highest paid player in NFL history at the time. Instead of validating that number, the season fell apart before it ever even really got going. The Jags opened 0-4 and Lawrence dealt with shoulder injury that cost him time mid-season. Then against Houston, he took a hit that led to a concussion and the Jags shut him down by placing him on IR to end his year early. His final 2024 stat line was 10 starts with 2,045 yards, 11 TDs, and 7 interceptions. Doug Pederson was fired, and the conversation around Trevor had officially flipped. It wasn't a question of whether this guy could be elite anymore, people were asking if he was even good. 5 years after scouts had put him just a tad below Elway and Andrew Luck, fans were genuinely debating whether he belonged in the top half of the league at all. This is the part of the story where the noise around him hit its lowest point. It wasn't just quiet, it was actually negative. And it happened right before the biggest turnaround of his entire career. And so Jacksonville went looking for a new coach after they fired Doug Pederson, and they landed on Liam Coen, who had just finished turning around Baker Mayfield's career in Tampa Bay. It wasn't just a small improvement because Mayfield put up a career year under Coen's offense, and that kind of jump gets a coordinator head coaching interviews all over the league. When the Jags hired him, the hope was obvious that he could do it again with the former #1 overall pick who had all the physical tools but none of the consistency. Through the first half of the season, it didn't look like much was different. Through the first 9 games, Lawrence was averaging 222 yards per game with 10 touchdowns and 7 interceptions, while the Jags sat at 5-4. That's an okay stat line, but not a special one. And it made you wonder if this is just who Trevor Lawrence was at this point in his career. He played fine, but he never quite broke through to that elite level. And then came the conversation that changed the season. Coen's message to him wasn't complicated, and it wasn't some deep scheme adjustment either. He basically told him to stop playing scared and just cut it loose. Trevor had spent years being cautious with the football to protect against interceptions instead of trusting his arm. And Coen wanted that mindset gone so his quarterback could just go play. Whatever got said in that conversation worked almost immediately. Over the final 8 games of the season, Lawrence threw 19 touchdowns against just 5 interceptions, and the team won every single one of those games. We saw a different quarterback showing up on the tape every single week. Some of those performances were kind of hard to forget. During a 48-20 blowout of the Jets, he threw a career-high 5 touchdown passes. Then he went on the road to beat a top 5 Broncos defense with a clean game that featured no turnovers and no panic. He was just a quarterback executing against one of the best units in the league on their own field. And that kind of win used to be the exception for him. Now, it was becoming the pattern. By the time the year wrapped up, the full numbers told the story of their own. He set career highs across the board in completion percentage, total touchdowns, and his turnover ratio, which is better than anything he'd produced in Jacksonville before. The Jags won the AFC South and made the playoffs for the first time since 2022, which was the last time everyone thought he'd finally turn the corner. None of this happened in a vacuum. The Jags traded for Jacoby Myers mid-season, and he gave Lawrence a real receiver who could actually trust in tight windows. Parker Washington also kept developing into a real weapon on the other side, and having multiple guys to go to instead of just one made him massive. The actual numbers matter here, so let's put him on the table. He had 29 passing touchdowns, he threw for over 4,000 yards, and he was 5th in MVP voting this season. He won the AFC South title and made a playoff appearance, which shows he wasn't just limping across the finish line. This was a guy having the best season he's ever. Look at who's soaking up the actual conversation instead. Names like Caleb Williams, Drake May, Bo Nix, Jordan Love all get brought up constantly on national shows and in weekly rankings. People love to put them in those who is the future of the position debates. The thing is that Lawrence is right there with him in age. Some of these guys are the vet. He is the next generation, but he doesn't get talked about like that. So why the gap? Some of it is geography. Caleb Williams plays in Chicago. Drake May is in New England. Bo Nix is in Denver, and Jordan Love is in Green Bay. Those are markets with built-in national attention and teams that get primetime windows just by existing. The media covers them heavily whether they're winning or not, but Jacksonville doesn't get that luxury. But it isn't only about market size. Those guys have had signature statement wins on a big stage that people replay in their heads. Those performances become highlight packages on their own, but Lawrence's best stretch this year came in the form of quiet and efficient football over 2 months. He didn't have one signature night that took over the news cycle, and efficient play doesn't take over as much as viral moments do. His own history might be the biggest factor working against him. 5 years of "is he a bust?" conversations don't just evaporate because of one good stretch. People have already made up their minds about him somewhere between 2023 and 2024. Once that narrative sets in, it takes a lot to shake it loose because perception has a lot of inertia. It doesn't just turn on a dime just because that's what the stat sheet says. The contract also doesn't help. That $275 million extension puts him in the same financial tier as the Joe Burrows, the Josh Allens, Lamars, Patrick Mahomes. And once you get paid like that, people stop grading you on a curve. They compare you directly to the guys making the same money, and he's just not as good as them. The bottom line is that the perception lags production. It always has in every sport because the story people tell about a player takes longer to catch up than the player himself does. There's a real gap between the two when it comes to Trevor Lawrence right now. The tape from the past season says he's playing better than almost anyone outside of Jacksonville is giving him credit for, and the wins and the numbers back that up. The only thing that hasn't caught up yet is the conversation. But we'll see what he does in 2026. So there you have it. Watch this next video if you haven't already, and subscribe if you're new. Thanks for watching.